guess I also might as well tell you why it is worth bothering with a book like this at all. Because it's a very difficult book, and it's also the sort of book that will rattle you up. So Nietzsche is very interested in the problem of value. And the problem of value fundamentally is not the problem of what is the world made of, or even how does the world function, which are more, in some sense, more specifically scientific questions, but how is it that you should conduct yourself in the world? How should you act? And people act towards aims, in a sense, because we're active creatures and we're moving from one point to another. We're moving towards things that we want, and that means that we're guided by our desires. And we're not only guided by desires insofar as we have individual desires, we're guided by the structure that consists of how those desires are related to one another. So, for example, if you have a room full of people, say a room full of children, they're active and they're each pursuing their individual desires, but at some point they may choose to organize themselves into a game. And if they organize themselves into a game, what they're doing, for all intents and purposes, is producing a little society, a little micro-society. And within that micro-society, they're deciding what desires will be currently expressed and how they'll exist in relationship to one another. And that means that they can cooperate without too much conflict, and that they can jointly move towards a joint aim without, and gather all the benefits that might be associated with that. And that might be the accomplishment of the aim, whatever it is, but it also might be just the enjoyment that's to be had in the pursuit of that activity. Now, people do that socially, because we have to do that in order to get along with other people, because our desires have to be melded with those of other people. But we also do it psychologically, and those two things exist in a dance, because as I'm interacting with other people, the demands of the fact that we're interacting require each of us to arrange our desires in a way that's acceptable to everyone else. But at the same time, while we're doing that, we're also observing the process by which those desires are ordered, and then we internalize that process and use that to order our own desires. And so there's a constant mutually informative dance between the individual and the group. And the culmination of that is the organization of society and the simultaneous organization of the psyche. And it's that process that Nietzsche is talking about in these paragraphs. Now, you might ask yourself, well, what's the utility of articulating such things and conceptualizing them and understanding them? And the answer, in some ways, is straightforward. If you don't want to run afoul of your own desires, you have to organize them. Because some of them are short-term, and some of them are medium-term, and some of them are long-term, and some of them aim at this, and some of them aim at that, and it isn't necessarily the case that those desires allow for mutual fulfillment. So, for example, maybe you're very interested in pursuing a sexual relationship with someone, but you're also very interested in having a family and some stability in your life. Or maybe you're interested in pursuing a sexual relationship with a whole sequence of people, but you're also interested in having a family and stabilizing your life. It's not obvious that those desires can exist in the same universe without producing what you might think about as a war. And some of that might be a psychological war, but some of it's also going to be a war that actually occurs in existence while you're fighting through the contradictory consequences of wanting to pursue many people and formulate a stable relationship with one person. Now, part of the reason that you want to think about these sorts of things is because if you think about them and get your thoughts and your value system intelligently and coherently and cogently laid out, then when you act out that value system in the world, you're going to run into less conflict and less uncertainty and less misery, and you're going to have a higher probability of getting what it is that you want but you're also going to have a higher probability of getting what you want in a way that allows you to cooperate with other people without entering into too much conflict with them. And so in some sense, the purpose that you think, the reason that you think, or the purpose of thinking, is so that you can sort out how you're going to move forward in the world without having to directly run headlong into all the obstacles that you might run into if you were doing such a thing blindly. And so then you might ask yourself, well, why would you bother reading philosophy, or the philosophy written by someone who's great? And the answer to that is that they can help you think these things through in a manner that you would not be capable of doing on your own. You know, because Nietzsche, I mean, it's difficult to estimate how intelligent Nietzsche was, but I suspect he was perhaps 1 in a billion, which would put him far beyond the 99.999th percentile. And there's a massive difference between the ability of people to think as you move farther and farther out into the extremes of intelligence. And when you have the writings of someone who's 1 in a billion, then you can interact with those writings in a way that enables you, if you'll put the time in, to benefit from the spectacular fact of that intelligence. Nietzsche was a full professor by the time he was 24, at a time when he didn't even have to write his dissertation. They just made him a full professor at a time where that never happened.